Hello, my name is Rick Moore, and today I have the great pleasure of interviewing author Tawnya Torres. She's the author of a fantastic new book called A Silent Discovery. By the way, I've got a copy of it right here. It's really a great cover and good backside. It's really great. How do you feel about being a published author, Tanya?
Um, it kind of seems not real. Like, that was a dream of mine for a long time. When I was like 5 years old, I remember I would tell my mom and all her friends, like I would draw or I would write little stories and I'd be like, I'm going to be a famous artist one day. And you never really think that you're going to do it, but I did.
It's available on all platforms too. And honestly, I think it's a really good read, and you should really read it because I was enthralled by this book. I really was. It caught my eye, and I read it the first time, and I thought, my goodness, a good author for a change, right? So, could you describe your book for us in a few words? Take as much or as little time as you'd like. Can you describe A Silent Discovery?
So, A Silent Discovery is a story about like personal growth. It's a lot about like family, love, longing. When I started writing it, I knew that I wanted to write a story about someone who was mute, but I wasn't quite sure how I was going to tackle it. And then I realized that I wanted the person with no dialogue to be the person telling the story. And I think that that's what makes it most attractive in a way.
It does, really. I didn't think of it that way, but it does. Now, what made you decide on writing a story about a princess that was mute? I can't get over that.
So I read a lot of fantasy and sci-fi. I read a lot of books, and I had never
Yep.
really seen like there's usually, like there'll be like maybe like a deaf character or like a small part for a mute character, but I was like, how could we incorporate this as like this is the main character, the story is about them and make it appealing, make it like, relatable. And I was thinking about how, there's like a lot of stories out there where it's just like that could touch someone, there's not a lot of books about people with like a speech impediment or something like
There
that.
really is not. I mean, there really is not. You've broken new ground, I think, right?
Yeah, I hope that, maybe it'll pave the way for more stories like that to come.
But honestly, what made you decide on doing the interplay of the princess and the prince? I'm fascinated by that, and by her sisters. It was really
so
great.
so I loved Pride and Prejudice. I loved kind of like the weird
Oh yeah,
family dynamic in that. And then I love, I love like all girls, like I love fairy tales. I love like the stereotypical prince and princess kind of thing. But I didn't really necessarily want it to be like she needs to be saved because throughout the story it's like she grows into a stronger person and
right.
Cade is a main character in it, but he is kind of like he's very soft, like he's in the background of the story. And when I was writing it, um I felt like the audience at first might think that Cade was the bad guy, which you realize later on of course he's not the bad guy.
Right.
And
That's
again, I always like to write like a scary story, and it usually turns into a romance.
well, I thought it was really fascinating the way you portrayed the one girl that died, early on.
Oh, Penelope, the middle sister.
Yes.
I feel like the middle sister or the middle sibling in families are often they like go back and forth between the other siblings and the parents, like whatever's kind of going on. And so in a way, it's like Penelope represented like the glue in the family in a
Yep.
sense. And I think that a lot of people can that have other siblings can kind of relate to that.
Yeah, in it, you explored the dissolution of the family bonds quite nicely because her father died and she died, and the whole family kind of fell apart. It brought out the animus in the queen too, right?
Yes, which I think is very real in families. Like a family will go through a hardship. Someone who was kind of like the figurehead of the family dies, and everything starts to fall apart. And people will try to step up, like Penelope tries to step up, keep the family together. But a lot of times, it's like once kind of like a trauma like that happens, it's really hard for a family
It
to
is.
remain the same.
It really, really is. I thought it was a fascinating story and a fantastic conclusion, right? So it's only 18.99, but it's well worth the read. Well worth your reading it. I think it's congratulations, Tanya.
Oh,
Oh,
thank you.
yeah, you've got another book coming up, The Heart of the Machine. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
So, Heart of the Machine, I was listening to a lot of Grimes and I was watching a lot of the Joe Rogan, Elon Musk podcast. I was gearing up to write a sci-fi story, so it's the one that I felt least confident in because I'm not the smartest person. I wanted to build a world that seemed realistic and not too too high sci-fi. I wanted it to be like very much rooted in reality. And I was like, how do I go about this? And again, I was trying to write kind of more like a science fiction horror story. It turns into more of a love story of a scientist falling in love with his late father's creation, which is a human robot hybrid that is made to kill the aliens.
It's really fascinating. Honestly, I think it's quite clever the way you pulled it off. And you made the world so believable because it's set in Japan, which is an odd setting for the story. And
I
honestly,
have been told it's an odd setting, but I wanted it, I just felt like it couldn't take place in the United States. It seemed like it needed something
well,
different.
that's what I mean. Honestly, it couldn't have taken place in the United States. Well, I guess it could have, but having it set in Japan gave it that something extra because honestly, it took you away from the United States because it's not too far in the future, but honestly, it made Japan come alive. You know what I mean? In a different way. You don't normally think of Japan as that type of culture, but it was. It was really cool. I really liked it. I
And I
really,
just
really
I like
liked it.
the idea of like a laboratory in a mountain. And I was trying to think of
God, that
mountains to
was
put
so
it in.
clever.
So I was scouring the internet, like what is the one? And so that's how I came out with Mount
That
on
was
Top.
so clever. I mean, honestly, I thought that was a great touch. I mean, honestly, it was great. I mean, I can't say enough about that book because honestly, your Silent Discovery is a fantastic book. And The Heart of the Machine is also a fantastic book. You've got to read it when it comes out. But after that, you have another book you finished up, which was your first book, I understand, that you ever wrote. And it has a fascinating plot. It's called The Soul Keeper's Assistant. I mean, tell us about that too, because we're immensely curious about it.
So that one also takes place in Japan. Again, it was like the setting just didn't seem like believable in the United States. And I also was thinking of
Yeah,
like kind of like a lot of mainstream media, it takes place like Marvel, DC world takes place in New York. It's always about New York. And so I
yeah.
was like,
You're
I wanted to
right.
write a story that was kind of like cool like that, but in a different setting. So I thought that like Japan would be a cool setting. Also just like to add to, it's supposed to be a thriller suspense story, like a domestic thriller suspense about a young man with mental health issues that's obsessed with his young stepsister and he's always trying to
Yep.
protect her. And I just thought it would come off kind of weird in the United States. And for whatever reason, the setting of Japan made it seem like it was still creepy and dark, but it just seemed more believable in a
It
sense.
did. It really, really did. I love your settings to Japan because they're so realistic, right? I just surprising that I do, right? Now, let's see. You've got how would you feel about doing an audiobook for you trying it? Because honestly, I think you should record your own audiobook, The Silent Discovery. And I think you have a natural voice for it. Would you be willing to give it a try?
I would. I think that that would be fun. Also, like, you know, even before, you know, the audiobook thing ever came up, I would read to my boyfriend and he's like, you should do your own audiobooks. You should be
Oh,
the
you
one to
definitely should. You definitely
record.
should. I think you've got a natural voice for it. And I think you've got a naturally expressive voice, which really carries through the audience, really makes them relate to you in a positive way. So it's pretty good. I mean, honestly, right. Now, tell us a little bit about the Soul Keeper's Assistant. That's fascinating.
So besides the setting in Japan and it's again like with the
Right,
weird family dynamic,
right.
um, I wanted to write a story. So I wanted it to be kind of like American Psycho meets Haruki Murakami because I
That
always loved
is really
thrillers.
cool.
And I love like Haruki Murakami and how he can kind of write like these um, magical realism kind of stories that are
Oh,
super
yes, yes.
still very interesting and still like very personable in a way. And so I thought about when Ryan does see the Soul Keeper, who is a demon, that again, that it wouldn't play out right. Like I was like, if this is in New York, it's like going to come off more like comic booky. And I
Yep,
wanted this to
yep.
be something deeper, something
It
more.
did. It did come off very well. I mean, the Soul Keeper's Assistant was aptly named too. I'll leave that to the readers to discover your story, but honestly, it's very, very good. I'm very impressed with this. Now, it's near the end of the year, right? But I'd like to enter your book in contests. Would you be willing for that?
I would love that. I used to enter the contest all the time. Obviously I
Oh,
never won,
great.
but I think that I'm like, maybe now that I have, I've like proven that it's like, well, I've been published, maybe my story's worth looking at again.
Oh, yes, they are. Believe me, they are. I mean, honestly, considering the competition out there, this is far and above them, far and above them.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yes. Now, you did all this while writing part-time. It's amazing to me that you wrote as much as you did working part-time. I mean, it's odd to see a writer that's prolific. But I can't wait to see what you do when your writing becomes a full-time career. What would you tackle next?
Oh, well, so it kind of started as a little bit of like a joke. I kept getting rejected from some of the companies like Karina and other imprints of Harlequin for my
Right.
romance stories not being romance enough. So I've been kind of experiencing what it's like to write darker romances and also some erotica. Trying my
That's
hand at
really
that
cool.
one.
That's really cool. I mean, honestly, is that your next project?
That is my next project, to see how that one plays off, because I've done the fantasy, I've done the thriller, I've done the sci-fi. I'm like, and I used to be really scared to write about sex. I used to be like, I can't do it, I don't think I can do it.
Yep.
So I was like, that's a challenge right there. Kind of like when I wrote A Silent Discovery, it was a challenge to write a character with no dialogue and have them be the one telling the story. So I was like, this is just a new kind of challenge for me. And maybe it'll be really bad, but it's
I
worth a
don't
try.
think so, because honestly, you've set out to write very different genres and you've succeeded at writing every one of them.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yes, I think you have. All right. Can we do another interview next week at the same time?
Yes, I would love that.
All right, then. So until then, everybody look for A Silent Discovery by author Tawnya Torres. And I'm sure you won't be disappointed by that book because it's fabulous. All right. Goodbye, Tanya.